I have here will be valuable. So I am a CISO at Elastic, and I am coming at this from more of a macro perspective, talking about the broader environment, global environment, technology environment that we're operating in today, how Gen AI, LLMs fit into that, and what that means from a CISO role. So if you were here for Kevin's presentation last night, I also have a very optimistic view and think that many of the challenges and many of the issues that CISOs and security teams are facing today can be helped, solved, improved by the use of AI technology. And I'll go into a little bit of kind of what I foresee and would love to see happening. So to start, we all read the various security reports, data breach report, mTrends, Sophos. And while the numbers have been improving year over year, we still have some pretty eye-opening and pretty disturbing components that we need to look at. So if we look at ransomware as certainly one of the top threats that's facing a number of organizations, right now we're sitting at about 5 days of dwell time, and that number is continuing to go down. In general cyber attacks, you're at 16 days of median dwell time, and those continue to go down as well. On the flip side, discovery is sitting at 277 days. Now you can go 108 days faster than using some type of AI technology, but that's still over 100 days. In 100 days compared to the 5 or 16, we still have a significant gap in speed and agility that we need to address. And so operating in that environment, businesses are really focusing on and looking at a collection of changes that are happening all at the same time. We have digital transformation that has been rapidly accelerated, certainly through COVID. We have geopolitical nation-state attacks that are targeting everyone these days, and no one's immune, and that's an approach that we haven't been used to. And there's the expanding skills gap crisis. Regardless of what you see as the source, there's still a gap of what skills we need today and what's available in the market for us. So to introduce myself in a little bit more detail, I'm Mandy Andress. As I said, I'm CISO at Elastic. I have 25 plus years in the security space. I've worked in financial services, consumer electronics. I had my own security consulting company for a while and published Surviving Security in the early 2000s, kind of the first book that really looked holistically at a security program and looked at all the components and how do you put all of that together to be as effective as possible. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Thomas Friedman, wrote The World is Flat, and this quote's from a New York Times column that he wrote and had published in 2022, and we've never been here before. And in his column, he's looking at the combination of the collection of changes that is happening in the world that we've never seen all happening at the same time. And so we have this triumvirate of focus areas. We have digitization that's going on in organizations, so moving everything from kind of paper, manual, to digital processes. The digitalization, which is then using that data that is now digitized and using it online, using it in online processes, using it in automation. And then within all of that, we have some significant geopolitical changes and tremendous decentralization that we are seeing happening in the world today that's really changing the dynamics of how we're operating, whether you're looking at data sovereignty and wanting to keep data where it is created from a country perspective, or the use of disinformation campaigns, misinformation, to change political outcomes. So first, looking at the digitization, the pandemic significantly increased the rate of digitization. A number of organizations completed projects in 2 to 3 months when they were originally predicting they could take 5 to 10 years. And one was very interesting to see what the forcing functions of the pandemic could do. And so about 74% of organizations saw things moving faster. But the biggest change was in customer demand. And the demand that consumers and customers were starting to expect coming out of the pandemic, whether order everything online and have it delivered to your house, have everything available virtually, not having to go to physical appointments because it's a little bit unwieldy, time-consuming. But often the return to work and working in the office versus working remote has continued to be a big trend. And certainly from a hiring perspective, we're actively hiring some folks on the security team, and one of the biggest reasons we hear from candidates who are looking is my current company is forcing return to work, and I don't want to do that. And so it's really driving some change and movement across what employees are looking for in their organizations. And then most importantly, all of these changes are largely here to stay. And we may see some modifications over time, but the pandemic really created a step change in how we interact with our technology and the expectations we have on our technology. So with all of this digitalization, all of that means is there's more data, way more data being created. And expectation 2025 is 181 zettabytes, which is 1 billion terabytes. And you see the between 2019, 2020, a bit of the jump. That's the kind of increase with COVID and the pandemic, and that more rapid move to digitization. And this is only going to continue to increase. We're only creating more and more data. But a couple interesting statistics. Within all of that data, 90% of it is replicated data. Only about 10% of that is truly new data that's being generated. It's other things that are being copied or expanded on. And if you wanted to take the time to download all the data on the internet, it would only take you 181 million years to do that. I don't know exactly what bandwidth, but it's a long time. So with more data comes, how do we use that data? And the end result is more of everything. More devices, more integrations, more apps, more users, and it's changing everything that we're utilizing. If you look back from how you live your life today, how you interact with technology, to what you were doing 5 years ago, there's been tremendous and significant changes. I never thought, even when I got my first iPhone in 2010, I never thought, 14 years later, I literally live and can run my life on my iPhone. Everything I do and need to do, I can do from that device, and that was unheard of. And for my kids, they like to live on their phones for different reasons, but just trying to understand that and having conversations with my kids who love to tell me that I was born in the prior century, which does make me feel old, and just their take on what the world means to them and the world that they've experienced from a technology perspective to those old days when, like, what, you had to watch commercials, and you had to dial into the internet, what does that mean? So it's really interesting to see these changes and where they're going. And so with all of that, we're also seeing a significant rise in automation. Because there's so much change, there's so much data, there's so much we need to do, there's no way that as humans we can, one, process all of that data and understand what it means, nor do we have the capacity or the skills often, or the interest to do a lot of the repeated tasks that we need to have happen. And so you're looking at how do you really take advantage of all of the greater insights. We can get greater mean time to detection, mean time to response, increased productivity. Some really strong challenges that are opportunities that we have, and how do we utilize automation to both expand the opportunities, but also address some of the challenges that we're facing today, which I touched on a few minutes ago. And then as we're working with automation, it continues to get smarter. A lot of this was covered in some of the presentations yesterday. And starting with your basic assisted intelligence, moving into augmented intelligence, which is what we're seeing in our ride sharing and stuff today. And then the autonomous intelligence, when you're looking at the algorithms and things that are being a bit more predictive, and because you like this is what you're going to like, and the autonomous driving, and all the various algorithms that are seemingly running our life these days. All of that put together, we have a digitization, we have the digitalization then of all of the processes and analysis around that data. We have the geopolitical issues. All that's creating is more and more decentralization. We're not getting less of anything, we're getting more of everything. I often think back to when the first ramp of DLP from a security perspective, we need to make sure we understand where our data is going, we need to understand what's our sensitive data, what's our PII data, and the only thing we did is we exploded where that data lives. We started using SaaS tools and all the integrations there. We moved to the cloud and continue to just replicate all of our data. So all we're doing is expanding and creating more and more and more. And along with the decentralization, touching on the geopolitical aspects a bit, is the cyber balkanization. Much more local, country-specific focus, regulations. And so it's looking at how do you operate in a global environment when you're operating then in an environment where individual countries have very specific rules, regulations, requirements, or even kind of cultural aspects that they're looking to enforce. And what I see today is we're now operating at a new inflection point with AI coming into this macro environment that we're operating in and driving very significant changes that we're starting to see today, and certainly we'll see some changes in the future that I don't think we can even anticipate today, back to the quote from Bill Gates that was used yesterday. And if I look back, so I came into the world somewhere between the microprocessor and database inflection point on this chart. And for me, just thinking back from when modern OSs came in, introduction to the internet, the early discussions of the cloud and what that looks like today, I am very excited and phenomenally interested in what this new AI inflection point will bring us over the next 5 to 10 years. And at its core, generative AI, LLMs, whatever aspect of it you want to talk about, will disrupt every single business. We all know the ChatGPT story of just how fast it reached 1 million users and 100 million users, fastest of any online technology that came in. But more importantly, looking at how does it impact humans, how does it impact revenue, how does it impact companies and their operations. And many, many jobs will be automated. And there is a lot of fear entering into the mindset of, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my job? And certainly in the security aspect, certainly SOC analysts that I talk to, on one hand, are very excited about the aspects of automation and how AI and some of the technology in that space could help them. But they're also fearful that if you're talking about taking away all the kind of tier 1 analyst roles and automating all of that, I'm a tier 1 analyst, what does that mean for me? And so it's driving and helping them understand that there's still a lot of work and activity that needs to happen, and reskilling, upskilling, and helping them through that. And technology shifts. Talked about some of them. We're going to continue to see them happen, I think, even more rapid than we have in the past. And that drive to really focus on the personalization aspects of it. And things are becoming more and more and more specialized. You have streaming services and other kind of decentralized services, just the start of that. You get what you're interested in, what you're focused on, positive aspects, social media, bringing some of the negative aspects of that into the world. So this audience understands all of this information, kind of MLAI, Gen AI, LLMs, and how they're being used. And as I started that, all of this is driven by data. And how do you make sense of all of the massive amounts of data that is being created? And we have so much data that certainly as humans, we can't look at all of that and understand what's happening. But what Gen AI is really helping us do is really start to make sense of that data. We've had BI tools and we've had various things over the years, but what we're seeing happening with Gen AI is taking that to a very advanced level from what we've known in the past. And as we talked about over the last day and a half, that generative AI, it has its limits. There's biases, generic hallucinations. I won't go into detail on these. We're all very familiar with the various aspects of Gen AI that we need to be mindful of. So lots of positive, lots of optimism, but need to be mindful and make sure we're taking care of some of the concerns that everyone's discussing. And then at the end of it, the power of generative AI, it all lives in data and being able to understand and make sense of that data, and data being the common denominator for all of security's challenges, whether you're looking at that of someone doesn't have access to do the job that they need to do, or they have too much access to do their job. We're unable to truly recognize patterns in our behavior of our users, of our systems, and not able to do that in real time, and not able to do that even just quick, if we don't want to do it in real time. And then lack of team members, all of those challenges that we talk about on a regular basis. How can we work to solve them? And I see AI providing that bridge of being able to have all of this data that we have today, how do we bring it all together, how do we make sense of it, and how do we make it actionable and usable in our environment for security and security at scale. And so we know that threat actors today are using AI. We touched on the phishing messages that are getting much better and much faster yesterday. Automate, scale attacks, understanding patterns within data, whether it's Metasploit or other tools, but starting to create new attacks, some of the morphing of malware and the things that are happening there. And the impact of that then on an organization is all of those numbers that I talked about, the dwell time, the ransomware, those numbers are just going to continue to decrease. And from my perspective, I see attacks changing from the low and slow APT type attacks that we've been experiencing and been talking about to much more really quick strike, get in, get out, and the ability to take massive amounts of information, whatever it is they're looking for, very, very quickly. And more rapid adaptation within environments and the ability to kind of automorph based on what is learned, and touched on the dwell time. So thinking about that, I say, well, that's a very scary world that we want to live in. But I do think that defenders can make use of it and counteract some of the threats. We'll be able to better identify patterns and really understand what is happening in our environment, giving us deeper analysis, deeper understanding, and being able to do that faster, being able to take, when you're ready, automated action at the speed of data, at the speed of electronics, versus waiting for a human to review and take action, which at that point, your entire environment could be encrypted with ransomware, depending on your broader structure. But also being much more strong in your prioritization, in your true understanding of what should I do next, what should I focus on. I think taking all of the data that we have available, we touched on the risk quantification in the board presentation earlier today. How do you tie all of that together to really just tell you, what do I need to do next? Back to what Kevin was talking about last night. And with all of the data, we still have our fundamental challenges that we face as security professionals. We know users will click. We can have awareness training, we can have education, but we're humans, social engineering, we will fall for something. We will click, so we need to take advantage of that. And looking at credentials, certainly network infrastructure, strong perimeter was the norm in the past. Today, with digitalization, move to cloud environments, credentials are now the, I would say, entry point. And we see that with the attacks that are happening today. And lots of conversations on browser, the new OS, and what are credentials within all that. So just seeing that paradigm change in what the focus of security needs to be. And for me, what that means is taking a step back and how we, in general, have been approaching security needs to shift from focusing on what we know we don't want to see happen. We don't want to see this connection here. We don't want to allow this. We don't want to see this process running here, to a much more, understanding what's happening in your environment, and then understanding what's anomalous, because the world is changing so fast, technology is changing so fast, threats are changing so fast. We can't keep up with that speed to be able to always define, this is what I don't want to see in my environment. And so it's flipping and focusing your analysis and your understanding on all the data you can gather in your environment, about your environment, and then understanding what is traditional, typical behavior across your environment, and then alerting on what is anomalous. And with the Gen AI technology and the LLMs, I think we're much better positioned to do that well. We've had behavior analytics and tools in the past that have tried, and at the very beginning had some success. I think we're able to move much further along the maturity line with what we have available to us today. And I know in this audience there's a lot of difference of opinion on whether defenders or attackers will be able to have the balance. And my perspective is, in time, as the technology continues to improve and evolve, that defenders will ultimately end up with the advantage in this area. And I look at that because, one, if you have a true understanding of what's happening in your environment and your behavior, And the ability to have that really deep understanding and that context. What we're often lacking today is just the context of your own environment. And what do I have? Where is it? What's happening? And today, threat actors can get in and spend the time to look around and have that understanding much better than you have of your own environment. And in the future, threat actors will need to be able to come in and spend some time to understand. And if we have the technology and the ability to see them doing that and being able to really quickly take action. So I'm very interested in the talk that is at least on the agenda for later tonight on the AI versus AI, because I think that's a pretty interesting potential that is coming for us. So with that, my ultimate ideal, my perspective is I really think self-defending environments are now achievable. It was all the rage. We thought it was all going to happen with SOAR. Ultimately, that didn't work out. But I think, certainly not today, but in the foreseeable future, I do think we'll have the ability to really understand what is happening in our environment. And if we want to automatically make the changes very quickly and have our own systems adapting based on what's changing in the threat landscape and the threat environment and just the broader infrastructure of our business. So going through all of this, we have massive changes in the macro environment. We have a lot of changes that are driving how do we need to approach security. And so at the end of the day, as a CISO, what do I need to do? What's important? What do I need to talk about with the board? What do I need to look at for my security strategy? And so there's a lot of talk about the role of CISO is changing. And we're seeing all of that, both from business expectations, business perspectives, the SEC, the SolarWinds, is just a piece of it. But fundamentally, what the CISO needs to focus on has changed, evolved, and grown. So when I started in security and had some of my first security leadership roles, I was like, okay, I have these things I need to focus on, and they're kind of pretty bucketized, very clear. These are the things that I address. And I think about what a CISO needs to do today. This is the CISO mind map, if no one's seen that before. And it just continues to get more and more complex. You have your standard security operations, all the security activities that we're used to, driving larger and larger budgets, working much closer on business enablement, getting involved in M&As, technology just exploding and expanding, regulatory environments changing quickly. So we need to understand legal, sometimes better than lawyers in our organizations. Risk management continues to be a continuing increasing topic. And then identity management really, really exploding based on it becoming really the new key control in our environment. And those threats are continuing to change and evolve. They're not slowing down, only speeding up. We've got kind of supply chain and all of the topics that we're talking about today, and going out into broader artificial intelligence abuse, the space attacks that we talked about the last session last night, digital surveillance, many, many, many more things, and things coming that we aren't thinking about today and aren't anticipating. And so 4 key components that I see changing within the CISO role, and kind of moving from that technical expert to a business expert. And from a business expert, what does that mean? And to me, it means being able to talk with your senior executives, with your board, to help them understand the impact that security events could have on the business, whether it's revenue impacts, reputation impacts. What is that, and how can you articulate that? The risk quantification that we talked about earlier today is one piece of that, but really understanding for your business, for your audience, what is the best way to communicate? And then moving from that team of no to being that business enabler and that risk manager. And it's, well, we'd love to tell folks and teams, may not want to do that. In today's world, there's often not the opportunity to be able to even say that for business reasons, oftentimes maybe for regulatory reasons. There's changes that you have to make, and how you help the organization make those in the most balanced manner, or in a way that introduces the least amount of risk based on the organization's overall risk appetite. And as the risk management focus has become more and more important, one of the key things that I have seen impacting that is the difference between an individual's risk appetite and an organization's risk appetite. And so you'll have a lot of folks in security that are very, very conservative, very, very risk averse, and get very uncomfortable when their business is willing to accept what they view as a very risky approach or a very risky process. And that leads to a lot of, I think, soul searching for folks, and it's really understanding when you're looking at new opportunities and new jobs, one thing to keep in mind is to really understand what is that organization's risk appetite compared to your own. Because you'll be very, very uncomfortable if you're in an organization that is very, very comfortable accepting risk and you're not. And I think that's an under-analyzed aspect of security teams and organizations. We all love our tools, but really moving to business outcomes. Don't matter what the tool is, don't matter how we get there. What are we going to achieve? When are we going to get there? And how is that going to help the business? And a lot more collaboration and influencing. We're all seeing that in our roles. Ties goes hand in hand with the risk manager and the business enabler aspects of the shift in the role. Okay, things are changing. But what does that mean? What do we have to do to accept these changes, adapt for these changes? So I'm going to touch on probably some more macro type of activities for a security leader, for a CISO to consider, and how to make those moves from a technical expert to a business expert in risk management and business enablement. And first and foremost is including security as part of your business strategy. That is very easy to type, it is very easy to say, it is very hard to do. It takes a lot of education. If you're in an organization that doesn't have that understanding of how security can impact your business. I'm at Elastic today, a SaaS company. We receive petabytes of data from our customers. Our executives, our board know that security is a fundamental component of the success of the business. I was in financial services before coming to Elastic, and while there were regulatory concerns and aspects of security, it wasn't core to the business. And most of the work there was driven by regulations and requirements that were more focused on kind of consumer banks, had some impact on the kind of more asset management, insurance aspects of financial services. And so this is where becoming a business enabler and becoming a business-focused security leader really ties into how do you communicate that to your executives and help them understand how it can impact their business. And so the first place to look is really understanding what are the business objectives, those key strategic activities and outcomes that your company is working towards, and looking at how security can help that. It can be certainly from digitalization. One of the key areas, certainly if you're consumer-facing, is how can we make logging in and authentication easier? How can we make it more streamlined? How can we make it less cumbersome? And looking at it in a way that you're improving the user experience, looking at it from with an empathetic approach, but the outcome is also greater security. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of deep thinking, but those opportunities are there for you to identify and find out. Another aspect is risk. So we have the business enablement, more of the top line gains. On security risks, they're often buried within operational risks, within technology risks. And as we're talking about security and underlying data and all of the digitization and digitalization that I started with, those risks are strategic risks. And helping your leadership understand that also drives the risk conversation. If you're burying your security risks down in your operational and your technology, you're missing some impacts or potentially missing some impacts on what could happen overall within the organization. Another key piece I've spent many years building SOCs and incident response plans, and one of the most common missing aspects that I see in organizations is that the business crisis response plan. You have your technical incident response, you have what your forensics experts will do, you have your DR, BCP, but when you look at how does a company come out of a significant security event with their reputation intact, it's those companies that understand how to communicate, what to communicate to the public, when to do it, what to offer. And all of that is driven by practicing that, having a clear plan, having crisis communications already in place, understanding who's going to say what, who's going to be the speaker for the organization, how are we going to communicate, and understanding kind of in macro incidents what your response will be as a business. And I think for this area, I think for business reputation, this is the most significant area to invest in and spend time in. And it's often a lot of education for PR folks and comms folks, but once they get it, they're really on board. We touched on this yesterday in Isaac's establishing a culture where security reports are celebrated. We'll go into that in any more detail. He did a great job covering that. So in addition to focusing on, all right, how do we get security better understood on the impacts for the business? I think within security, we need to change our mindset significantly from how we've been approaching security for the future. First is your environments are only increasingly complex. They're never getting less complex. So how do we understand that? If I look at kind of the core tenets of what do you need to do to understand your environment, asset management, understanding your services, your integrations, we say that, but it's really hard to do. And we often get very distracted by the new shiny tools and aren't continuing to really focus on those fundamentals. And this is a piece where I think AI, certainly from a cloud environment, can help and be able to make sense of all of those various cloud accounts and cloud configurations and kind of infrastructure that you have within your hyperscalers. And as I touched on before, baselining activities, changing that mindset from what is happening in my environment that I don't want to see, specifically to this is how my environment's already always operating, and here's something odd. And what that really drives also is a change in impact from you don't always know if something's a security or an operational. Then it drives your observability, your SRE teams, your security teams to work and partner and collaborate much more closely. Because if there's something unusual that happens in the environment, is it a security issue? Is it an operational issue? Did someone push code that had some bad parameters and everything's down? Or did that code have some type of malicious component that was added into it? So we're really closing the gap and starting to remove the silos of all the different technology components of an organization, which will only, again, drive, from my perspective, greater insights, greater analysis, and a greater understanding. As I touched on, minimizing those silos is an outcome partially of moving to more of a behavior approach in understanding your environment. But one of the big challenges today, when you're starting to look at, back to the cyber balkanization and the decentralization and having data sovereignty requirements, if you have a global organization and you have data that needs to stay in many individual countries around the globe, attackers don't care. Threat actors are working globally, and they're working across. So how do you get that visibility that you need, that understanding of your environment, while still keeping the data where it needs to reside and maintaining all of your regulations and laws that you need to follow as an organization? And so it's breaking down those barriers, sometimes cultural barriers, often organizational barriers. I've talked to a number of large organizations where the vulnerability management team does not talk to the SOC, does not talk to the identity management team, and they're all looking at their silos individually. And no one's looking, even within the organization, holistically, and being able to then potentially map out any type of attack or threat actor moving across their environment. And those silos are, to me, the biggest challenge of success for us within organizations going forward. When we look at our environments today, many teams, the core of their security program is their SOC, and detection, monitoring, and response. And I look at a SOC as, yes, it's necessary, but I want my SOC and I want security monitoring to be the last place where I learn about something. I want to be much more proactive. And again, very easy to say, very hard to do. So how do you start to make that mindset shift within your organization? What does it mean to be proactive within your organization? And looking to define that and starting to make that shift. And how do you approach that both from a communications perspective, but also sometimes it might lead to technical changes, certainly might lead to skill, personnel changes from a mindset shift. And we can't get away from, and only I think getting larger, is a global perspective, global threats. When we're looking at hybrid environments where you have on-prem infrastructure, you have your cloud infrastructure, soon we'll have our space infrastructure. That one freaked me out a little bit. And how do we tie all of that together and make a cohesive program that is meaningful within the context of the world that we will be living in and working in? So all of that, a lot of hard things to do. What are some key steps that you can do to just, where to begin? I'd say first and foremost, very deeply understand your organization's business strategy and how your company makes money. If you can talk in those terms, use the same vocabulary, align security with the terms that the business is using to talk about how they're being successful, starts to tie security into the business and making that connection. Thinking holistically, I do think we still get, within all of our silos within security, I think the only key thing that is really changing today is everything is connected and interconnected, and if you're not looking at your environment in that way, you have some significant blind spots that will be very easily taken advantage of. We're starting to see that with the secrets management, secrets being exposed, and using that to jump around and move laterally within organizations, and because they're valid credentials, they don't look odd within your typical security monitoring that you have in place today. Being very comfortable with change. I joke, I get bored very quickly. I think I landed in security because it's always changing. One thing I found really interesting is while security is always changing, security practitioners often hate change. And it's an interesting dynamic that I've struggled with a lot over the years through my career. And I think we only need to be more comfortable with change. The only thing that is going to continue to happen is things are going to change around us. And so how do you adapt and how do you get comfortable that what you just spent a lot of time and money building because of a business change, because of a new kind of vulnerability or exploit that was identified in key technology that you have, it is completely irrelevant. How do you quickly pivot? How do you change? How do you move forward? A big one for me is looking at failure as success. And folks can often get really mired in what's the impact of the failure? I'm not good, don't know what I'm doing, can't do my job. Look at failure as what went wrong? What can you learn from that? How can you do better the next time? And within security, we have a lot of failures. A security event that happens in our organization is a failure of something. How do we learn from that, all of our after actions? But even within our day-to-day, how do we look and learn from everything that we're doing? Leading to my last comment of embracing learning as a core job function. That's one thing that I talk about daily with my team, and we look at the kind of engagement results that come out for the organization, and the security team always has the highest response to that question of, I get what I need to do in my job to learn new things. And everyone asks, well, what are you doing? What are you doing differently? It's like, it's a core function of what we do. We just talk about it every day. Everything that we're doing, we talk about is learning. And so it's just become embedded within the culture and philosophy of the team that to be successful, you need to be continuously learning. A few pitfalls that I've learned over the course of my career, focusing too much on technology. I love technology. I used to think it could solve all the problems. It can't. People do a much better job. Took me a while to figure that one out. Forgetting the user, tying back to what Isaac talked about yesterday, really being empathetic, looking at things from the user perspective. I often talk about I am much more comfortable making my own job harder or the security team's job much harder to make life easier for the user and really helping them have security just embedded in their day-to-day processes and allowing them to be successful in their role. Change management, I talked about often security practitioners don't like change very much. I've often tried to go too fast on change because I see where we need to go, I see what we need to do to be successful, and I want to get there really, really fast. How to slow down, how to listen to the feedback, how to make adjustments in your approach, and being highly, highly repetitive in what you're communicating and what you're saying. And folks will get there. It just takes much longer than you want it to. Another downfall that I see from a lot of security leaders is trying to own everything. Sometimes security leaders are trying to own everything, and sometimes it's the organization trying to give you everything. In my past organization, when I first got there, anything that came up as security related was like, oh, the InfoSec team will take care of that. There was no feeling of overall responsibility across the organization. We changed that in time. But in today's highly, highly complex world, there's often practitioners in your organizations that know much more security about a very specific topic than anyone on your security team. And it's leveraging that knowledge, leveraging those different perspectives, and really keeping the work closest to where it lives, and being able to really focus in on how are you embedding security, how are you integrating security in everything that you're doing, so it's not something that you're trying to add after the fact or trying to get visibility. And lastly, being too hard on yourself. The role is challenging, there's a lot that happens, and for myself, I am too hard on myself more often than not. And so I repeat that to myself every day and ensure that I'm not applying that. Some days are easier than others. So to wrap this up, I really enjoyed this quote from Justin Trudeau in 2018, putting some things in perspective. The pace of change has never been this fast, and it will never be this slow again. So with all of this, how do we continue to think about the context of the macro environment that we're operating in, what that means for us, and what are the things that we can and should do in our roles and in our organizations to help us continue to be successful. So, thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Can you speak to, you mentioned several times in your presentation discussions with your board. How has that evolved over, say, the last 12 months? Or has it evolved? Could you speak to kind of that dynamic, that relationship with you and the board?
Sure. From the board, so I report quarterly to the audit committee. And over the past year, there's certainly the push and the ask for, from a risk quantification, putting risks into those business terms and focusing it from that perspective. I will say the past 6 months, once the SEC rule was published and then now into effect, that's been driving most of the change of just the board trying to really understand what does that mean from their own role, having to disclose how they are governing security. There's a lot of what should we be doing, and I'm getting a lot deeper questions and a lot more focus on I can see they're trying to really figure out what cybersecurity governance means for them and the board that they're operating at that moment. And materiality is also a key aspect of that. I'm not seeing that, I don't see that specific topic much in my discussions with the audit committee. Our legal team is driving all that. We're an input into a materiality determination. But I will be curious to see with the SEC how that will continue to drive change. I see that as the biggest thing that's impacting those conversations today.
Are you the one who's kind of guiding those conversations, or do you feel like the board has external influences where they're trying to guide it and you're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll talk about that. Like, where do you see that kind of flow? I
see a lot of external influences. So 3 members of our audit committee are all on multiple boards, and multiple boards often also in high tech. So they're bringing a lot of their perspective that they're hearing from either what's happening in those organizations or what they're seeing. And some of them are also very involved in just broader cybersecurity policy, what's happening globally. So they bring some of that perspective in question in as well.
Cool, thank
All right, I think we're at time. Thank you very much, everybody.